The Valorian Grand Armada came out of faster-than-light travel, like a swarm of silver insects spreading across the darkness of space. 12,000 warships, each one built for war and conquest, took their positions just beyond the orbit of Mars. They had traveled for 6 months across the galaxy to reach this small blue planet called Earth. And now their moment of triumph was close. High Commander Zethrax stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. He was tall even by Valorian standards. His gray skin stretched over a thin frame, his large black eyes reflecting the glow of dozens of display screens. For 300 years, he had led the Armada to victory after victory, conquering 46 star systems and bringing countless species under Valorian control. Earth would be his 47th conquest, and he expected it to be one of the easiest. The Valorians had been watching humanity for 50 years. They had sent spies and probes to study this young species, and what they found had made them laugh. Humans were primitive. They had only recently learned to travel between planets in their own solar system. Their weapons were crude things that used chemical explosions and nuclear reactions. They had no shields, no faster-than-light travel, no understanding of the advanced sciences that the Valorians had mastered thousands of years ago. High Commander called out Sensor Officer Kethra from her station. "We are detecting movement from the human defense perimeter near their moon." Zethrax turned his attention to the main display screen. A small group of contacts was moving away from the moon, heading toward the Armada. He leaned forward, curious to see what the humans had sent to face him. 7 ships. The humans had sent 7 ships. Zethrax stared at the display for a long moment, certain that there must be some mistake. His Armada numbered 12,000 vessels, from small fighters to massive dreadnoughts that stretched 3 kilometers from bow to stern. And the humans had responded with 7 ships. A sound filled the bridge, a clicking and chittering that was the Valorian way of laughing. Sub-Commander Vethka, his second-in-command, moved to stand beside him, her compound eyes wide with disbelief. "Is this a joke?" she asked. "Perhaps they mean to surrender and these ships carry their diplomats?" "No," Zethrax replied slowly, studying the human vessels on the display. They were sleek and angular, painted in dark colors that made them hard to see against the blackness of space. The largest was perhaps 800 meters long, smaller than even the smallest cruisers in his fleet. "I have studied the humans. They are a stubborn species. They do not surrender easily. They mean to fight." More laughter spread across the bridge. Officers pulled up records of human military history, showing images of their primitive rockets and their old wars fought with tanks and aircraft. The idea that such a species could challenge the might of the Valorian supremacy was simply too amusing. "Should we destroy them now, High Commander?" asked Weapons Officer Drethel. "A single volley from our 4 batteries would be more than enough." Zethrax considered the question. Part of him wanted to end this quickly, to swat aside the human ships like insects and proceed with the invasion. But another part of him was curious. The humans had to know they were outmatched. Why would they send 7 ships against 12,000 unless they had some plan, some trick they believed would save them? No, he decided. Let them come closer. I want to see what they think they can do. Far across the void of space, Admiral Catherine Brooks stood on the bridge of the USS Resolute, the flagship of the United Earth Defense Fleet. She was a woman of 53 years. Her dark hair now streaked with gray, her face lined by decades of service and sacrifice. She had given her entire life to this moment, to the defense of her world against the threat that everyone had known was coming. Around her, the bridge crew worked in calm silence. There was no panic, no fear, just the quiet focus of men and women who had trained their entire careers for this day. Lieutenant Commander Daniel Ortiz monitored communications at his station. Commander Patricia Vance, the ship's executive officer, coordinated with the other 6 vessels in their small fleet. Lieutenant Benjamin Cole tracked the enemy armada on the tactical display, his young face pale but determined. "Admiral," Ortiz said, "we're picking up Valorian communications on open channels. They're laughing at us, ma'am. They think this is funny." Brooks nodded slowly. She had expected this. The Valorians saw 7 small ships and believed they understood what they were facing. They had no idea how wrong they were. "Let them laugh," she said quietly. "They won't be laughing for long." She turned to look at the tactical display, at the vast cloud of red dots that represented the alien armada. 12,000 ships, each one crewed by beings who had come to conquer her world, to enslave her people, to add Earth to their growing empire. They had done this to dozens of other species, crushing anyone who stood in their way. But humanity was different. Humanity had known this day was coming for 40 years, ever since the first alien probe had been captured and studied. They had seen the truth written in the stars. The galaxy was a dangerous place, filled with species that saw conquest and domination as their natural right. There was no galactic federation waiting to welcome humanity with open arms. There were only predators and prey, and humanity had decided long ago that they would never be prey. "All ships report ready for Ghost Protocol," Commander Vance announced. "Reactors are powered up. Systems are standing by." Brooks took a deep breath. What they were about to do would change everything. The secret that humanity had kept for 4 decades was about to be revealed. There would be no going back after this. "I have received authorization from the President," she said. "All ships, activate Ghost Protocol. Show the Valorians what we really brought to this fight." The order went out through quantum-encrypted channels to the other 6 ships. Deep within each vessel, systems that had been dormant began to come alive. Reactors that existed in no official record started to power up. And across the human fleet, men and women who had dedicated their lives to this moment prepared to reveal the greatest secret in human history. The Valorians thought they were facing 7 ships. They thought humanity was a primitive species, barely capable of space travel. They thought this would be an easy conquest, a quick victory to add another world to their empire. They were about to learn how wrong they were about everything. The Ghost Protocol began with a low hum that spread through the hull of every human ship. Crew members felt it in their bones, a vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Deep in the engineering sections, technicians watched as power readings climbed higher and higher. Far beyond anything the ships were officially supposed to be capable of producing. Aboard the Resolute, Chief Engineer Marcus Webb stood at his console with sweat running down his face. He had spent 20 years of his life working on the Ghost Protocol systems, and this was the first time they had ever been activated outside of testing. Everything they had worked for, every sacrifice they had made, came down to this moment. "Power transfer at 60%, he reported through the communication system. 70%. 80%. On the bridge, Admiral Brooks watched the power readings climb. Around her, the bridge crew remained focused on their tasks, but she could see the tension in their shoulders, the way they held their breath. They all knew what was about to happen. 90%, Webb's voice continued. 95%. Ghost Protocol at full power. "Admiral, we are ready." Brooks turned to Commander Vance. "Signal all ships. Begin deployment." Across the human fleet, something remarkable began to happen. The 7 ships that the Valorians had been watching suddenly seemed to shimmer and blur. Then, from the sides and underbellies of each vessel, smaller shapes began to emerge. These were not escape pods or shuttles. They were warships, dozens of them. Vessels that had been hiding inside dimensional folds created by technology that humanity had never revealed to anyone. Specialist. Amy Warren sat at her sensor station aboard the Valorian scout ship Kenai. Her job was simple. Watch the human ships and report any changes. What she saw on her display made her freeze in her seat, her mind refusing to accept what her instruments were telling her. Where there had been 7 human ships, there were now 14, then 28, then 56. "Sub-Lieutenant," she called out, her voice shaking. "The human contacts are multiplying. My sensors must be malfunctioning." Sub-Lieutenant Kethros walked over to look at her display. What he saw made his gray skin turn even paler. "Run a full diagnostic on your equipment." "I already have, sir." 3 times. The readings are the same every time. Aboard the Eternal Dominion, High Commander Zethrax watched his own tactical display with growing concern. The number of human contacts continued to climb. 100, 200, 400, 800. "What is happening?" demanded Sub-Commander Vethka. "Where are these ships coming from?" "It must be some kind of sensor trick," Zethrax replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "The humans are projecting false images to confuse us. Our sensors are seeing ghost signals." "High Commander," the sensor officer said carefully, "I am receiving data from 17 different ships across the fleet. All of them show the same contacts. If these are false images, they are fooling every sensor system we have." The number kept climbing. 1,000. 1,100. 1,200. Finally, the deployment stopped. Where 7 human ships had been, there were now over 1,200. They were smaller than the original 7 vessels, ranging from 200 to 400 meters in length, but each one showed energy readings that made no sense. Their power output was far beyond what ships of that size should be capable of producing. On the bridge of the Resolute, Admiral Brooks allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. The secret was out. For 40 years, humanity had hidden the truth about their capabilities from every spy and probe that the alien powers had sent to watch them. They had built ships in secret facilities deep underground and on the far side of the moon. They had developed weapons using technology stolen and reverse-engineered from a dozen different alien sources. They had created the Ghost Protocol, a system that allowed ships to exist in a dimensional fold, invisible to all known forms of detection. And through all of it, they had let the galaxy believe they were primitive. They had shown the aliens what they expected to see, a young species struggling to master basic space travel. It had been the greatest deception in human history. "Admiral," Lieutenant Cole reported from the tactical station, "the Valorian fleet is holding position." "They seem confused." "They should be," Brooks replied. "They thought they were coming to conquer a helpless world. Now they're facing the real United Earth Defense Fleet." "Incoming communication from the Valorian flagship," Ortiz announced. "They want to talk." Brooks nodded. "Put them through." The main view screen flickered, and High Commander Zethrax appeared. His black eyes were narrower now, his posture tense. The amusement that had filled his bridge earlier was completely gone. "Admiral Brooks," he said, pronouncing her name carefully, "you have surprised us with this hidden fleet. But I must point out that you still have only 1,200 ships against our 12,000. Numbers have not changed in your favor." Brooks met his gaze without flinching. "High Commander, numbers are not everything in war. But since you seem confident in your advantage, let me explain something to you." She gestured to Lieutenant Cole, who brought up data on the view screen that both bridges could see. "These readings show the power output of our smallest destroyer," Brooks said. "As you can see, it produces more energy than your largest dreadnought. Our weapons are based on technology you have never seen. Our engines can accelerate at rates your ships cannot match. And our crews have trained for this fight their entire lives." She paused, letting her words sink in. I am giving you one chance to withdraw from our solar system. Take your fleet and leave. Report to your masters that Earth is not the easy target you believed it to be. If you refuse, if you choose to continue this invasion, then I promise you that most of your ships will never see home again." Zethrax stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, his mandibles clicked together in what might have been her laugh. "You are bold, Admiral. I will give you that. But the Valorian supremacy does not retreat from primitives, no matter what tricks they might possess. We will proceed with our invasion, and your hidden fleet will be destroyed." The view screen went dark as he cut the connection. Brooks turned to face her bridge crew. They were looking at her, waiting for her orders, ready to do whatever was necessary. "All ships," she said calmly. "Battle stations. Prepare to engage the enemy." The first human ships began to move, and High Commander Zethrax felt something he had not experienced in over 200 years of warfare. It took him a moment to recognize the feeling, because it had been so long since he had felt it. It was doubt. "High Commander," his sensor officer reported, his voice rising with alarm. "The human vessels are accelerating at 47 gravities. Correction, 52 gravities. Their speed is increasing faster than our tracking systems can follow." Zethrax stared at the tactical display. No ship could accelerate at those rates. The crews would be crushed into paste by the forces involved. Yet the human ships continued to accelerate, moving through space with a speed and agility that should have been impossible. "All batteries, open fire," he commanded. "Destroy those ships before they reach our lines." Across the Valorian armada, thousands of weapons powered up and began firing. Plasma bolts streaked through space, missiles launched by the hundreds, energy beams swept across the void seeking targets. It was a wall of destruction that should have wiped out the human fleet in seconds. But the human ships were no longer where the Valorians were aiming. They twisted and turned with impossible grace, slipping between the incoming fire like water flowing around stones. The few shots that came close were deflected by shields that flared with golden light, absorbing impacts that should have torn the ships apart. Aboard the destroyer USS Relentless, Captain Samuel Green gripped the arms of his command chair as his ship performed maneuvers that would have killed everyone aboard without their advanced inertial dampening systems. Around him, his crew worked with focused precision, each person doing their job without hesitation. "Entering weapons range," reported Lieutenant Maria Santos from the tactical station. "I have firing solutions on 12 enemy vessels." "Fire at will," Green ordered. The Relentless opened fire. Railguns along the ship's spine launched tungsten projectiles at a fraction of the speed of light. At those velocities, the rounds carried more destructive energy than nuclear weapons. They struck the first Valorian cruiser before its crew even knew they were under attack, punching through shields and armor like they were made of paper. The ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light, its reactor breaching and consuming everything around it. Before the debris had even finished spreading, the Relentless had already destroyed 2 more ships and was moving on to its next targets. All across the battlefield, similar scenes were unfolding. Human destroyers dove into the Valorian formation with terrifying speed, their weapons tearing through enemy ships with devastating efficiency. The Valorians tried to fight back, concentrating their fire on individual human vessels. But the human ships were too fast, too agile. By the time a targeting solution was calculated, the human ship had already moved somewhere else. Captain Lisa Monroe commanded the destroyer Defiance from the center of the battle. Her ship had already destroyed 18 enemy vessels in the first 10 minutes of fighting, and her weapons showed no signs of slowing down. She watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction as red dots representing Valorian ships winked out of existence one after another. "Captain," reported Lieutenant Kevin Park from the sensor station, Large concentration of enemy ships at bearing 157. It looks like they're trying to form a defensive formation around their dreadnoughts. Monroe studied the formation. The Valorians were learning, adapting to the human tactics. They were pulling their largest ships together, surrounding them with layers of smaller vessels to provide overlapping fields of fire. It was a smart move, one that would make it harder for individual human ships to strike at the high-value targets. "Signal the Resolute," she ordered. "We need a coordinated strike on that formation." Admiral Brooks received the message aboard the Resolute and quickly assessed the situation. The battle was going well, far better than even their most optimistic projections. The Valorians had lost nearly 1,000 ships in the first hour of fighting, while human losses were still under 50. But the enemy was adapting, and if they were allowed to establish defensive positions around their dreadnoughts, the battle could become much more difficult. "All ships," she broadcast across the fleet channel. "This is Admiral Brooks. Formation Delta. We're going to break their defensive lines." Across the battlefield, human ships began to move with coordinated precision. They had trained for this exact scenario thousands of times in simulations. Every captain knew their role. Every crew member understood what was expected of them. The human fleet formed into 3 groups, approaching the Valorian defensive formation from different angles. The Valorians saw them coming and redirected their fire, trying to destroy the attackers before they could reach the defensive line. Plasma bolts and missiles filled the space between the fleets, creating a storm of destruction that seemed impossible to survive. The human ships flew straight into it. Their shields flared constantly, absorbing hit after hit. Some ships took damage, their hulls breached by lucky shots, their crews fighting to keep systems running. A few were destroyed, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of incoming fire. But the rest kept coming, their weapons firing continuously, tearing gaps in the Valorian formation. Captain Green's Relentless led the first group straight into the heart of the defensive line. His ship was taking heavy damage, warning lights flashing across every console, but his weapons were still firing. He watched as his railguns tore through a Valorian battleship, then targeted the dreadnought behind it. "All 4 batteries," he ordered. "Concentrate fire on that dreadnought." The Relentless unleashed everything it had. Railgun rounds, plasma lances, and missiles all struck the massive Valorian ship at once. The dreadnought shields held for almost 3 seconds before collapsing. Then the weapon's fire reached the hull, tearing through armor, destroying systems, reaching the reactor core. The dreadnought exploded with a force that destroyed a dozen smaller ships around it. Through the gap in their formation, more human ships poured in, their weapons blazing. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, High Commander Zethrax watched his fleet being torn apart. In just 2 hours of battle, he had lost over 3,000 ships. The humans had lost perhaps 100. The ratio was unthinkable, impossible, yet it was happening right in front of his eyes. "High Commander," Sub-Commander Vethka said quietly, "we cannot win this battle. We must consider withdrawal." Zethrax wanted to argue, wanted to believe that there was still some way to turn this around. But he was a veteran of countless battles, and he knew the truth when he saw it. The humans had outmatched them in every way that mattered. "Signal all ships," he said finally, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. "Fall back to defensive positions. Prepare for negotiation." The order to fall back spread through the Valorian armada, and for the first time in 3 centuries, the mighty fleet of the Supremacy retreated from battle. Ships that had conquered dozens of worlds turned and ran from an enemy they had expected to crush without effort. The shame of it burned in the hearts of every Valorian warrior, but they had no choice. To continue fighting was to die. High Commander Zethrax stood alone on the observation deck of his flagship, watching the wreckage of his fleet drift past the viewport. Thousands of destroyed ships floated in the void, their hulls torn open, their crews dead. Among them were some of the finest vessels in the Supremacy, ships that had been the pride of their fleet for generations. Now they were nothing but debris. How did this happen? He whispered to himself. How did we fail so completely? The door behind him opened, and Sub-Commander Vethka entered. She moved to stand beside him, her own eyes fixed on the destruction outside. Our losses have been counted, she reported quietly. We have lost 6,400 ships, almost half of the armada. The humans have lost 231. Zethrax closed his eyes. The numbers were even worse than he had feared. The Valorian Supremacy had not suffered a defeat like this in over 1,000 years. When word reached the High Council, there would be consequences. Someone would have to answer for this disaster. The humans are hailing us, Vethka continued. Admiral Brooks wishes to speak with you. Part of Zethrax wanted to refuse, to pretend that he still had some dignity left. But he was a practical commander, and he knew that further resistance would only lead to more deaths. He had already lost too many warriors today. I will speak with her, he said. They returned to the bridge, where the view screen flickered to life showing Admiral Brooks. She looked the same as she had before the battle, calm and composed, showing no sign of triumph or gloating. That almost made it worse. High Commander Zethrax, she said. Your fleet has stopped attacking. I assume you are ready to discuss your withdrawal from our solar system. Admiral Brooks, Zethrax replied, forcing his voice to remain steady. You have won a great victory today. I will not pretend otherwise. But I must know something before we proceed. How did you do this? How did you hide such power from us for so long? Brooks was silent for a moment, as if considering whether to answer. Then she nodded slowly. 40 years ago, one of your probe ships crashed on our planet. We recovered it and studied its technology. That was when we learned the truth about the galaxy, about species like yours that conquer and enslave others. We realized that we were not safe, that one day someone would come for us. She paused, her eyes never leaving his. We also realized that if we showed our true capabilities, we would be seen as a threat. The larger powers would destroy us before we could become strong enough to defend ourselves. So we decided to hide. We built our fleet in secret. We developed our weapons where no one could see. And we let the galaxy believe we were primitives, barely capable of leaving our own planet. 40 years of deception, Zethrax said slowly. 40 years of pretending to be weak while you prepared for this day. Yes, and now you understand why. If we had revealed our strength earlier, you would have sent not 12,000 ships, but 100,000. You would have overwhelmed us before we were ready. By hiding, we bought ourselves time to become strong enough to fight. Zethrax felt a grudging respect forming in his mind. He had spent his entire life studying warfare, and he had to admit that the human strategy was brilliant. They had played the long game, sacrificing pride and reputation to gain the one thing they needed most: time. What happens now? He asked. Will you destroy the rest of my fleet? That depends on you, Brooks replied. I am offering you a choice, High Commander. You can gather your remaining ships and leave our solar system. Return to your supremacy and tell your leaders what happened here. Tell them that Earth is not a world to be conquered. Tell them that if they ever threaten us again, we will respond with everything we have. And if I refuse? If I choose to continue fighting? Brooks's expression did not change, but her voice grew colder. Then we will destroy every ship in your fleet, down to the last fighter. We will leave no survivors to carry word back to your people. And then we will build more ships, and we will come for your worlds. We will make sure that the Valorian supremacy never threatens anyone again. The threat hung in the air between them. Zethrax knew she was not bluffing. He had seen what her ships could do. If the humans could build a fleet this powerful in just 40 years of secret development, what could they accomplish in another 40 years with unlimited resources? You would start a war with the supremacy? He asked. A war that could consume the entire galaxy? We did not start this war, Brooks replied. You did, when you brought an invasion fleet to our home. We are simply defending ourselves. But yes, if you force us to, we will fight that war. And we will win. Zethrax looked around his bridge at the officers who had served with him for centuries. They were watching him, waiting for his decision. He could see the fear in their eyes, the understanding that their lives depended on what he said next. Very well, Admiral Brooks. I accept your terms. The Valorian Armada will withdraw from your solar system. I will deliver your message to the High Council personally. Brooks nodded. A wise decision, High Commander. You have 6 hours to collect your survivors and depart. Any ship still in our system after that time will be considered hostile and destroyed. The view screen went dark. Zethrax turned to face his crew. You heard the Admiral. Begin recovery operations. We leave in 6 hours. As his officers rushed to carry out his orders, Zethrax remained standing in the center of the bridge. He thought about what he would say to the High Council, how he would explain this disaster. He thought about the humans and their hidden fleet, their secret weapons, their 40 years of patient deception, and he thought about what it meant for the galaxy that a species like this now stood among the stars. The age of easy conquest was over. A new power had risen, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Valorian Armada departed from the solar system, exactly 5 hours and 47 minutes after High Commander Zethrax agreed to Admiral Brooks's terms. Of the 12,000 ships that had arrived expecting easy conquest, only 5,600 remained to make the long journey home. Behind them, they left the wreckage of their fallen comrades. Twisted metal and frozen bodies that would drift through human space for centuries to come. Admiral Catherine Brooks watched them go from the observation deck of the Resolute. She stood alone, her hands clasped behind her back, her reflection ghostly in the viewport glass. The battle was over, and humanity had won. She should have felt triumph, or at least relief. Instead, she felt only the heavy weight of what they had done and what still lay ahead. The door opened behind her, and Commander Patricia Vance entered. She walked quietly to stand beside her admiral, her own eyes fixed on the departing enemy fleet. Final casualty reports are in, Vance said quietly. We lost 247 ships, 18,612 personnel. The families are being notified. Brooks closed her eyes. 18,000 people who would never go home, who would never see their loved ones again. They had known the risks when they signed up for this duty, but that did not make their deaths any easier to bear. They died protecting Earth, she said. We have to make sure their sacrifice meant something. It did, Vance replied. We won, Admiral. We did what everyone said was impossible. We faced a fleet 10 times our size and sent them running. We won this battle, but the war is just beginning. She turned away from the viewport and walked toward the door. Vance followed her as they made their way through the corridors of the Resolute, passing crew members who saluted their admiral with tired but proud faces. These men and women had fought the battle of their lives, and they had emerged victorious. They deserved to celebrate, to rest, to mourn their fallen friends. But there would be time for that later. Right now, there was work to be done. The briefing room was crowded when Brooks arrived. Captain Samuel Green of the Relentless was there, along with Captain Lisa Monroe of the Defiance. Chief Engineer Marcus Webb had come up from engineering. Lieutenant Commander Daniel Ortiz sat at the communications station, monitoring channels for any sign of Valorian treachery. These were the people who had made this victory possible. The leaders who had turned 40 years of secret preparation into the greatest military triumph in human history. The president will address the world in 2 hours, Brooks announced as she took her seat at the head of the table. He will tell them the truth about our fleet, about the threat we faced, about what we did to protect our planet. After that, nothing will ever be the same. How do you think people will react? Green asked. 40 years of lies. That's not easy to accept. There will be anger, Brooks admitted. Some people will feel betrayed. But I think most will understand. We did what we had to do to survive. When the shock wears off, they'll see that. What about the Valorians? Monroe asked. They'll report back to their High Council. They'll tell them everything they saw. What happens when the Supremacy decides to send a bigger fleet? Brooks nodded. This was the question that kept her awake at night. Today's victory was only a beginning. The Valorian Supremacy controlled hundreds of star systems and commanded fleets that numbered in the millions of ships. If they decided to commit their full strength against Earth, even the hidden fleet would not be enough. That's why we can't stop now, she said. We need to build more ships, develop better weapons, train more crews. And we need to find allies. Allies? Vance raised an eyebrow. The galaxy doesn't seem very friendly. The Valorians aren't the only power out there. There are other species who have suffered under their conquest, worlds that were subjugated and forced into servitude. If we can reach them, offer them hope, show them that the Supremacy can be defeated, we might be able to build a coalition. The room was quiet as everyone considered this. It was a bold plan, perhaps an impossible one. But they had already done the impossible once today. Maybe they could do it again. There's something else, Brooks continued. The Valorians weren't the only ones watching us. Our intelligence indicates that at least 5 other major powers had observation posts in our system, studying us, deciding whether we were worth conquering. Now they know the truth about our capabilities. Some of them might be frightened. Others might see us as a threat that needs to be eliminated before we grow stronger. So we just traded one enemy for several, Green said grimly. Maybe, or maybe we've earned their respect. In the galaxy, strength is the only thing that matters. We've proven we have strength. Now we need to prove we know how to use it wisely. The meeting continued for another hour as they discussed plans for the future. New shipyards would be built, no longer hidden but operating openly. Research programs that had been conducted in secret would be expanded. Diplomatic missions would be sent to make contact with other species, testing the waters for potential alliances. When the meeting finally ended, Brooks returned to the observation deck. Earth hung before her in the viewport, a beautiful blue and green sphere against the black of space. 8 billion people lived on that world, most of them still unaware of how close they had come to destruction. In a few hours, they would learn the truth. Their lives would never be the same, but they would still have lives. They would still be free. That was what mattered. A communication chime sounded, and Brooks answered it. The face of Lieutenant Commander Ortiz appeared on the small screen. Admiral, we're receiving a signal from deep space. It's not Valorian. We think it might be from one of the other powers. They want to talk. Brooks felt her heart beat faster. The galaxy was already responding to what had happened today. Whether that response would be hostile or friendly remained to be seen. Tell them we're listening, she said, and inform the president that our next chapter is about to begin. She turned back to the viewport, looking out at the stars that suddenly seemed so much closer than they had before. Humanity had stepped onto the galactic stage, and there was no going back. The universe was vast and dangerous, and full of wonders that humans had never imagined. But humanity was no longer hiding. They had revealed their strength to the cosmos, and the cosmos had taken notice. Whatever came next, they would face it together. That was what humans did. They survived. They adapted. They overcame. And sometimes, against all odds, they won.